Welcome back. So glad we're together again. It's time for chapters 3 and 4 of The Silver Chair, but we need to do a little review, don't we? Eustace has gotten back into Narnia. I'm so glad, and I'm sure you are too. And his friend Jill Pole has, and not a moment too soon because those they were after them. Do you remember who they were? Those bullies at Experiment House, that awful school they went to? But now they're in Narnia. But before they got there, some adventures have already happened. Eustace fell off the cliff, that enormously high cliff. But Aslan was there, and he blew him into Narnia. And then he had a few words with Jill because it was just because she was showing off that Eustace fell off in the first place. So I remember that Aslan had told Jill that he was going to blow her to Narnia too, and that as soon as they got there, he had a big job for them to do. They were to go and find the lost prince who had been kidnapped and taken away from his father, and his father was now old, the king of Narnia, and he didn't know whether his son was alive or not, but that they were to go and help find the prince, and that there were 4 signs that Jill had to memorize over and over and over again until Aslan was sure that she got them exactly right. And maybe it would be a good idea if we reviewed what those 4 signs were. She said, first of all, let's see, did I miss the page here? Okay, here are the signs. First, Aslan said, as soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old and dear friend. He must greet that friend at once. If he does, you will both have good help. Second, you must journey out of Narnia to the north till you come to the ruined city of the ancient giants. Third, you will find a writing on a stone in that ruined city, and you must do what the writing tells you. Fourth, you will know the lost prince, if you find him, by this, that he will be the first person that you have met in your travels who will ask you to do anything in my name, in the name of Aslan. You got all those? Jill's got them. She has said them over and over to herself so many times. She has got them completely memorized. Well, now, as we begin chapter 3, she has just been blown into Narnia and is standing there wet and kind of cold and looking pretty grubby and dirty because you remember that before they even got into that magic door, through that magic door, they'd crawled through bushes and up a muddy slope and whatever to get away from them. And so she's saying to herself, how wet I am. What made Scrub look so dingy, and Jill too, if she could only see herself, was the splendor of their surroundings. I had better describe them at once. Through a cleft in those mountains which Jill had seen far inland as she approached the land, the sunset light was pouring over a level lawn. On the far side of the lawn, with its weather vanes glittering in the light, rose a many-towered and many-turreted castle. I wonder which castle that is. Carabaravel, do you think? On the near side was a quay of white marble, and moored to this, the ship. A tall ship with a high forecastle and high poop deck, gilded and crimson, with a great flag at the masthead and many banners waving from the decks, and a row of shields bright as silver all along the bulwarks. The gangplank was laid to her, and at the foot of it, just ready to go on board, stood an old, old man. He wore a rich mantle of scarlet, which opened in front to show his chainmail shirt. There was a thin circle of gold on his head, and his beard, white as wool, fell nearly to his waist. He stood straight enough, leaning one hand on the shoulder of a richly dressed lord who seemed younger than himself, but you could see that he was old and frail. He looked like a puff of wind could blow him away, and his eyes were watery. Here's a picture of the scene with the ship, the castle in the background, all the crowd of people standing there. Can you see it all? Good. Immediately in front of the king, who had turned around to speak to his people before going on board the ship, there was a little chair on wheels, and harnessed to it a little donkey, not much bigger than a big dog. In this chair sat a fat little dwarf. He was as richly dressed as the king, but because of his fatness and because he was sitting scrunched up in the cushions, the effect was quite different. It made him look like a little shapeless bundle of fur and silk and velvet. He was as old as the king, but more hale and hearty, with very keen eyes. And his bare head, which was bald and extremely large, shone like a gigantic billiard ball in the sunset light. Further back, in a half circle, stood what Jill knew at once to be courtiers. They were well worth looking at for their clothes and armor alone. As far as that went, they looked more like a flower bed than a crowd. But what made Jill really open her eyes and mouth as wide as they would go was the people themselves, if people was the right word. For only about 1 in 5 was human. The rest were things you never see in our world. Fauns and satyrs and centaurs. Jill could give a name to these, for she had seen pictures of them. Dwarfs, too. And there were a lot of animals. Bears, badgers, moles, leopards, mice, and various birds, but they were so very different from the animals that one called by those names in England. Some of them were much bigger. The mice, for instance. When they stood on their hind legs, they were almost 2 feet tall. But quite a fact, apart from that, they all looked different. You could see by the expression on their faces that they could talk and think just as well as you could. "Golly," said Jill, "so it's true after all." But the next minute she added, "I wonder if they're all friendly." For she had just noticed on the outskirts of the crowd 1 or 2 giants and some people that she couldn't name at all. At that moment, Aslan and the signs rushed back into her mind. She had forgotten all about them for half an hour. "Scrub," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "Scrub, quick, do you see anybody you know?" "Oh, so you've turned up again, have you?" said Scrub, disagreeably, for which he had some reason. "Well, keep quiet, can't you? I want to listen." "Don't be a fool," said Jill. "There isn't a moment to lose. Do you see an old friend there? Because you've got to go and speak to him at once." "What are you talking about?" said Scrub. "It's Aslan, the lion. He says you've got to," said Jill despairingly. "I've seen him." "Oh, you have you? And what did he say?" "He said that the very first person you saw in Narnia would be an old person, an old friend, and you have to go and speak to him at once." "Well, there's nobody here that I've ever seen in my life before, and anyway, I don't know whether this is Narnia." "Well, I thought you'd been here before," said Jill. "Well, you thought wrong then." "Well, I like that. You told me. Oh, for heaven's sake, dry up and let me hear what they're saying." The king was speaking to the dwarf, but Jill couldn't hear a word he said. As far as she could make out, the dwarf didn't answer, though he nodded and wagged his head a great deal. Then the king raised his voice and addressed the whole court. But his voice was so old and cracked that she could understand very little of his speech, especially since it was all about people and places that she had never heard of. When the speech was over, the king stooped down and kissed the dwarf on both cheeks, straightened himself, raised his right hand as if in blessing, and then went, slowly and with feeble steps, up the gangway and on board the ship. The courtiers appeared to be greatly moved by his departure. They got out their handkerchiefs, and sounds of sobbing were heard in every direction. The gangway was drawn up, the trumpets sounded from the poop deck, and the ship moved away from the quay. It was being towed by a rowing boat, but Jill didn't see that. "Now," said Scrub, but he didn't get any further, because at that very moment, a large white object, Jill thought for a second that it was a kite, came gliding through the air and landed at his feet. It was a white owl, but so big that it stood as high as a good-sized dwarf. You can see that he is a very big owl. It blinked and peered as if it were short-sighted, and it put his head to one side a little and said in a soft, hooting sort of voice, "Too-hoo, who are you two?" "My name is Scrub, and this is Pole," said Eustace. "Would you mind telling us where we are?" "Well, in the land of Narnia, at the king's castle of Cair Paravel." Is that the king who just aboarded the ship? Too true, said the owl, sadly shaking its big head. But who are you? There's something magic about you, too. I saw you arrive. You flew. Everyone else was too busy seeing the king off that nobody knew except me. I happened to notice you. You flew. We were sent here by Aslan, said Eustace. Too-hoo, said the owl, ruffling out his feathers. This is almost too much for me, so early in the evening. I'm not quite myself until the sundown. And we've been sent to find the lost prince, said Jill, who was anxiously wanting to get into this conversation. Well, that's the first I've heard about it, said Eustace. What prince? You'd better come and speak to the Lord Regent at once, the owl said. That's him over there in the donkey carriage, Trumpkin the dwarf. The bird turned and began leading the way, muttering to himself, Hoo, what a to-do! I can't think clearly yet, it's too early. What is the king's name? Said Eustace. Caspian the 10th, said Owl. And Jill wondered why Scrub suddenly stopped startled and turned an extraordinary color. She thought she had never seen him look so sick about anything. But before she had time to ask any questions, they had reached the dwarf, who was just gathering up the reins of his donkey and preparing to drive back to the castle. The crowd of courtiers had broken up and were going in the same directions by ones and twos and little groups, like people coming away from watching a game or a race. Too-hoo! Ahem, Lord Regent, said the owl, stooping down a little and holding its beak near the dwarf's ear. Hey, what's that? Said the dwarf. Two strangers, my lord, said the owl. Rangers? What do you mean? Said the dwarf. I see two uncommonly grubby man-cubs. What do they want? My name is Jill, said Jill, pressing forward. She was very eager to explain the important business on which they had come. The girl's called Jill, said the owl as loud as he could. What's that? Said the dwarf. The girls are all killed? I don't believe a word of it. What girls? Who killed them? Only one, my lord, said the owl. Her name is Jill. Speak up, said the dwarf. Don't stand there buzzing and twittering in my ear. Who's been killed? Nobody's been killed, tweeted the owl. Who? Nobody. All right, you needn't shout. I'm not as deaf as all that. What do you mean by coming here to tell me that nobody's been killed? Why should anybody have been killed? You better tell him I'm Eustace, said Scrub. The boy is Eustace, my lord, hooted the owl. Useless, said the dwarf irritably. I dare say he is. So why are you bringing him to court, eh? Not useless, said the owl. Eustace. Used to it, is he? I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sure. I'll tell you what it is, Master Glimfeather. When I was a young dwarf, there used to be talking birds and beasts in this country who could really talk. There wasn't all this murmuring and mumbling and muttering and whispering. It wouldn't have been tolerated for a minute. Not for a minute. Sir Uranus, my trumpet, please. A little fawn who had been standing quietly beside the dwarf's elbow all this time now handed him a silver ear trumpet. It was looked like a trumpet, but if you spoke into it, it made it louder into your ear, before the days of hearing aids. It was made like the musical instrument called a serpent, so that the tube curled right around the dwarf's neck. While he was getting settled into it, the owl, Glimfeather, suddenly said to the children in a low whisper, My brain is a bit clearer now. Don't say anything about the lost prince. I'll explain later. It wouldn't do, to-hoo. Oh, what a to-do. Now, said the dwarf, if you have anything sensible to say, Master Glimfeather, try and say it. Take a deep breath and don't attempt to speak too quickly. With help from the children, and in spite of a fit of coughing on the part of the dwarf, Glimfeather explained that the children were strangers who had been sent by Aslan to visit the court of Narnia. The dwarf glanced at them with a new expression on his eyes. Sent by the lion himself, eh? And from that other place beyond the world's end, eh? Yes, my lord, said Eustace. Son of Adam and daughter of Eve, eh? Said the dwarf. But people at Experiment House hadn't heard of Adam and Eve, so Jill and Eustace couldn't answer this. But the dwarf didn't seem to notice. Well, my dears, he said, taking first and one and then the other by the hand and bowing his head a little, you're very heartily welcome. If the king, my poor master, had not this very hour set sail for the 7 Isles, he would have been glad of your coming. It would have brought back his youth to him in a moment, just for a moment, but now it is high time for supper. You shall tell me your business in the full council tomorrow. Master Glimfeather, see that the bedchambers and suitable clothes and all else are provided for these guests in a most honorable fashion. And Glimfeather, in your ear? Here the dwarf put his mouth close to the owl's head, and no doubt intended to whisper. But like other deaf people, he wasn't a very good judge of his own voice, and both the children heard him say, see that they're properly washed. After that, the dwarf touched his donkey and set off toward the castle at something between a trot and a waddle. It was a very fat little donkey, while the fawn, the owl, and the children followed at rather a slower pace. The sun had set, and the air was growing cool. They went across the lawn and then through an orchard and so to the north gate of Cair Paravel, which stood wide open. Inside, they found a grassy courtyard. Lights were already showing from the windows of the great hall on their right and from a more complicated mass of buildings straight ahead. Into these the owl led them, and there a most delightful person was called to look after Jill. She was not much taller than Jill herself, and a good deal slenderer, but obviously full-grown, graceful as a willow, and her hair was willowy too, and there seemed to be moss in it. She brought Jill to one of the round rooms in the turret, where there was a little bath sunk in the floor, and a fire of sweet-smelling wood on the hearth, and a lamp hanging by a silver chain from the vaulted roof. The window looked west into the strange land of Narnia, and Jill saw the red remains of the sunset still glowing behind the distant mountains. It made her long for more adventures, and she felt sure that this was only the beginning. When she had her bath and brushed her hair and put on the clothes that had been laid out for her, and they were the kind that not only felt nice, but looked nice and smelt nice and made nice sounds when you walked as well, she would have gone back to gazing out of that exciting window, but she was interrupted by a bang on the door. Come in, said Jill, and in came Scrub, also bathed and splendidly dressed in Narnian clothes, but his face didn't look like he was enjoying it. Oh, here you are at last, he said crossly. I've been trying to find you for ever so long. Well, now you have, said Jill. I say, Scrub, isn't it all simply too exciting and scrumptious for words? She had forgotten all about the signs and the lost prince for the moment. Oh, that's what you think it is, do you? Said Scrub. I wish to goodness we'd never come. Why on earth? I can't bear it, said Scrub. Seeing the king, Caspian, a doddering old man like that is frightful. Why, what harm does it do you? Oh, you don't understand. Now that I come to think of it, you couldn't, because I didn't tell you this, that our world has a different time from theirs. Well, how do you mean? The time you spend here doesn't take up any of our time. Do you see? I mean, however long we spend here, we'll still get back to Experiment House the moment we left it. That doesn't sound like much fun. Oh, dry up and don't keep interrupting. And when you're back in England, in our world, you can't tell how time is going here. It might be any number of years in Narnia while we're having 1 year at home. The Pevensies explained it all to me, but I, like a fool, forgot all about it. And now, apparently, it's been about 70 years, Narnian years, since I was here last. Do you see now? I come back and find Caspian an old man. Then the king was an old friend of yours? Said Jill. A horrid thought had just struck her. I jolly well think he was, said Scrub miserably, about as good a friend as a chap could ever have. And the last time he was only a few years older than me. And to see that old man with a white beard, and to remember Caspian the morning we captured the Lone Islands, or in the fight with the sea serpent, it's frightful. It's worse than coming back and finding him dead. Oh, shut up, said Jill impatiently. It's far worse than you think. We've muffed the first sign. Of course, Scrub didn't understand this. Then Jill told him about her conversation with Aslan and the 4 signs. Excuse me, I've got a wasp on my finger. Then Jill told him about her conversation with Aslan and the 4 signs and the task of finding the lost prince which had been laid upon them. So you see, she wound up, you did see an old friend, just like Aslan said, and you ought to have gone and spoken to him at once. And now you haven't, and everything's gone wrong right from the very beginning. But how was I to know? Said Scrub. Well, if you'd only listened to me when I tried to tell you, it would have been all right, said Jill. Well, yes, and if you hadn't played the fool on the edge of that cliff and jolly near murdered me, all right, I did say murder, and I'll say it again as often as I like, so keep your hair on. We'd have come together and we'd both know what to do. I suppose he was the very first person you saw, said Jill. You must have been here for hours and hours before me. Are you sure you didn't see anyone else first? I was only there for about a minute before you, said Scrub. He must have blown you quicker than me, making up for the lost time you lost. Oh, don't be a perfect beast, Scrub, said Jill. Hello, what's that? It was the castle bell, ringing for dinner, and thus what looked like turning into a first-rate quarrel was happily cut short, and both had a good appetite by this time. Supper in the great hall of the castle was the most splendid thing that either of them had ever seen. For though Eustace had been in that world before, he had spent his whole time at sea, and he knew nothing of the glory and the courtesy of the Narnians at home in their own land. The banners hung from the roof, and each course came in with trumpeters and kettle drums. There were soups that would make your mouth water to think of, and the lovely fishes called pavenders, and venison and peacock pies, and ices and jellies, and fruits and nuts, and all manners of wines and fruit drinks. Even Eustace cheered up and admitted that this was something like. And when all the serious eating and drinking was over, a blind poet came forward and struck up the grand old tale of Prince Cor and Aravis and a horse called Bree, and the song was called The Horse and His Boy, and it told of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Calormen and the lands between in the golden age when Peter was the High King in Cair Paravel. I haven't time to tell it now, but it's well worth hearing, and I hope you have already heard that story. If not, go back and listen to the story of the horse and his boy. While they were dragging themselves upstairs to bed, yawning their heads off, Jill said, I bet we sleep well tonight, for it had been a full day, which just goes to show you how little anybody knows about what's going to happen to them next. And this chapter 4, is called A Parliament of Owls. Parliament is what we would call Congress or the government in Washington. In England, they call their government Parliament, and it meets in London. But this is going to be a Parliament of Owls. We'll find out about it. It's a very funny thing that the sleepier you are, the longer you take getting to bed, especially if you're lucky enough to have a fire in your room. Jill felt that she couldn't even start undressing first until she sat down in front of that fire for a little while first. And once she sat down, she didn't want to get up again. She had already said to herself about 5 times, I must go to bed, when she was startled by a tap on the window. She got up, pulled the curtains, and at first saw nothing but the darkness. Then she jumped and started backward, for something very large had dashed itself against the window, giving a sharp tap on the glass as it did so. A very unpleasant idea came into her head. Supposing they have giant moths in this country? Ugh! But then the thing came back, and this time she was almost sure that she could see a beak, and that the beak had made a tapping noise. It's some huge bird, thought Jill. Could it be an eagle? She didn't very much want a visit even from an eagle, but she opened the window and looked out. And instantly, with a great whirring noise, a creature alighted on the windowsill and stood there, filling up the whole window, so that Jill had to step backwards to make room for it. It was the owl. "Hush, hush, to-woo, said the owl. "Don't make a noise. Now, are you two ready in earnest, really in earnest, about what you've got to do?" "About the lost prince, you mean?" said Jill. "Yes, we've got to be." For now she remembered the lion's face and his voice, which she had nearly forgotten during all the feasting and the storytelling in the hall. "Good," said the owl. "Then there's no time to waste. You must get away from here at once. I'll go and wake up the other human, and then I'll come back for you. You'd better change those court clothes and put on something you can travel in. I'll be back in 2 And without waiting for an answer, he was gone. If Jill had been more used to adventures, she might have doubted the owl's word, but this never occurred to her, and in the exciting idea of a midnight escape, she forgot how sleepy she was. She changed back into a sweater and some shorts. There was a Girl Scout knife on the belt of the shorts, which might come in useful, and she added a few of the things that had been left in the room for her by the girl with the willowy hair. She chose a short cloak that came down to her knees and had a hood. Just the thing if it rains, she thought. A few handkerchiefs and a comb. And then she sat down and waited. She was getting sleepy again when the owl returned. "Now we're ready," it said. "You'd better lead the way," said Jill. "I don't know all these passages yet." "Too-hoo," said the owl. "We're not going through the castle. That would never do. You must ride on me. We must fly." "Oh," said Jill, and stood with her mouth open, not much liking that idea. "Shan't I be far too heavy for you?" "Too-hoo, don't you be a fool. I've already carried the other one. Come on now, let's put out that lamp first." And as soon as the lamp was out, the bit of night that you saw through the window looked a little less dark, no longer black, but gray. The owl stood on the windowsill with his back to the room and raised his wings. Jill had to climb onto his short body and get her knees under the wings and grip tight. The feathers felt beautifully warm and soft, but there was nothing to hold on to. "I wonder how Scrub liked his ride," thought Jill. And just as she was thinking this, with a horrible plunge, they had left the windowsill, and the wings were making a flurry around her ears, and the night air, rather cool and damp, was flying in her face. Here's a Jill on the back of Glimfeather, the owl. It was much lighter than she expected, and though the sky was overcast, one patch of watery silver showed where the moon was hiding above the clouds. The fields below her looked gray, and the trees black. There was a certain amount of wind, a hushing, ruffling sort of wind, which meant that rain was coming soon. The owl wheeled around so that the castle was now ahead of them. Very few of the windows showed lights. They flew right over it, northward, crossing the river. The air grew colder, and Jill thought she could see the white reflection of the owl in the water below her. But soon they were over the north bank of the river and were flying above wooded country. The owl snapped at something which Jill couldn't see. "Oh, don't, please," said Jill. "Don't jerk like that. You nearly threw me off." "Oh, I beg your pardon," said the owl. "I was just nabbing a bat. There's nothing so sustaining in a small way as a nice plump little bat. Shall I catch you one?" "No, thanks," said Jill with a shudder. It was flying a little lower now, and a large black object was looming up before them. Jill just had time to see that it was a tower, a partly ruined tower, with a lot of ivy on it. She thought, when she found herself ducking, to avoid the archway of the window, and the owl squeezed through it with her, through the cobwebbing opening, out of the gray, fresh night into a dark place inside the top of the tower. It was rather fusty inside, musty, and the moment she slipped off the owl's back, she knew, as one does somehow, that it was quite crowded. And when voices began saying from the darkness in every direction, "Too-hoo, too-hoo," she knew that it was crowded with owls. She was rather relieved when a different voice said, "Is that you, Pole?" "Is that you, Scrub?" said Jill. "Now," said Glimfeather, "I think we're all here. Let's hold a parliament of owls." Here's a picture of the ruined tower and the hole that they flew through. "Too-hoo, too-hoo, true for you. That's the right thing to do," said several voices. "Half a minute," said Scrub's voice. "There's something I want to say first." "Do, do, do," said the owls. And Jill said, "Fire away." "I suppose all you chaps, owls, I mean," said Scrub, "I suppose you all know that King Caspian the 10th, in his young days, sailed to the eastern end of the world. Well, I was with him on that journey, with him and Reepicheep the mouse and Lord Drinian and all of them. I know it sounds ridiculous, but people don't grow older in our world at the same speed they do in yours. And what I want to say is this, that I am the king's man. And if this parliament of owls is any sort of plot against the king, then I will have nothing to do with it." "Too-hoo, too-hoo, we're all the king's owls too," said the owls. "Well, what's all this about then?" said Scrub. "It is this," said Glimfeather, "that if the Lord Regent, the dwarf Trumpkin, hears that you have gone to look for the lost prince, he won't let you start. He'll keep you under lock and key." "Great Scott," said Scrub, "you don't mean to say that Trumpkin has become a traitor? I used to hear a lot about him in the old days. At sea, Caspian, the king, trusted him absolutely." "Oh, no," said a voice, "Trumpkin is no traitor. But more than 30 champions, knights, centaurs, good giants, and all sorts, have at one time or another set out to look for the lost prince, and none of them have ever come back. And at last, the king said that he was not going to have any more of the bravest Narnians destroyed in a search for his son. And now no one is allowed to go." "But surely he'd let us go," said Scrub, "when he knew who I was and who sent me." "Sent both of us," said Jill. "Yes," said Glimfeather, "I think very likely he would, but the king is away, and Trumpkin will stick to the rules. He's as true as steel, but he's deaf as a post and very peppery. You never could make him think that this might be the time to make an exception to the king's rule." "But you might think that he'd take some notice of us, because we're owls, and everyone knows how wise owls are," said someone else. "But he's so old now he'd only say, 'You're a mere chick. I remember when you were an egg. Don't come trying to teach me, sir, crabs and crumpets.'" This owl imitated Trumpkin's voice rather well, and there were sounds of owlish laughter all around. And the children began to see that the Narnians felt about Trumpkin the way people at school feel about some crusty old teacher whom everyone is a little bit afraid of and everybody makes fun of, but everybody really loves. "Well, how long is the king going to be away?" said Scrub. "If only we knew," said Glimfeather. "You see, there has been a rumor lately that Aslan himself has been seen in the islands in Terabithia, and the king said he would make one more attempt before he died to see Aslan's face again, and to ask for his advice about who is to be the king after him. But we're all afraid that if he doesn't meet Aslan in Terabithia, he'll go on east to the Seven Isles and the Lone Islands and on and on. He never talks about it, but we all know that he has never forgotten that voyage to the world's end, and in his heart of hearts, he wants to go there again." "Then it's no good waiting for him to come back, is it?" said Jill. "No, no good," said the owl. "Oh, what a to-do! If only you two had spoken to him at once, he'd have arranged everything, probably given you an army to go with you in search of the prince." Jill kept quiet at this and hoped that Scrub would be sporting enough not to tell the owls why this hadn't happened. He was, or very nearly, that is, he only muttered under his breath, "Well, it wasn't my fault," before saying out loud, "Well, very well, we'll just have to manage without it. But there's one more thing I want to know. If this Owl's Parliament, as you called it, is all fair and above board and by no mischief, then why does it have to be so jolly secret, meeting in a ruin in the dead of night and all that? Too-hoo, too-hoo, hooted several owls. Well, where should we meet? Where would anybody meet except at night? Well, you see, said Glimfeather, most creatures in Narnia have unusual habits. They do things by day, in broad blazing sunlight, when everybody ought to be asleep. And as a result, at night they're so blind and stupid that you can't get a word out of them. So we owls have gotten to the habit of meeting in sensible hours on our own when we want to talk things over. Oh, I see, said Scrub. Well, now, let's get on then. Tell us all about the lost prince. Then an old owl, not Glimfeather, related the story. About 10 years ago it appeared, when Rilian, the son of Caspian, was a very young knight, he rode with his mother, the queen, on a May morning in the northern parts of Narnia. They had many squires and ladies with them, and they all wore garlands of fresh leaves on their heads and had horns at their sides, but they had no hounds with them, for they were maying, having a party on May Day, not hunting. In the warm part of the day, they came to a pleasant glade where a fountain flowed freshly out of the earth, and they all dismounted and ate and drank and were merry. And after a time the queen felt sleepy, and they spread out their cloaks for her on the grassy bank, and Prince Rilian with the rest of the party went a little way from her, and that their tales and laughter might not wake her. And so presently a great serpent came out of the thick wood and stung the queen in her hand. All heard her cry out and rushed toward her, and Rilian was the first one to reach her side. He saw the snake gliding away from her, and made after it with his sword drawn. It was great and shining and as green as poison, so that he could see it well, but it glided away into the thick bushes, and he couldn't come to where it was. So he returned to his mother and found them all busy around her, but they were busy in vain. For at the very first glance at her face, Rilian knew that there was no medicine in the world that would do her any good. As long as life was in her, she seemed to be trying hard to tell him something, but she could not speak clearly, and whatever her message was, she died without delivering it. It was then hardly 10 minutes since they had heard her first cry. They carried the dead queen back to Cair Paravel, and she was bitterly mourned by Rilian and by the king and by all of Narnia. She had been a great lady, wise and gracious and happy, and King Caspian's bride, whom he had brought home from the eastern end of the world. And we even know what her father's name was, don't we? Ramadou. Yeah, that was the same lady with the long hair. The prince took, and the blood said that the men, sorry, let me read that whole thing again. She had been a great lady, wise and gracious and happy, King Caspian's bride, whom he had brought home from the eastern end of the world, and men said that the blood of stars flowed in her veins. They were right too, weren't they? And the prince took his mother's death very badly, as well he might. And after that, he was always riding on the northern marches of Narnia, searching for that venomous snake to kill it and be avenged. Nobody remarked much on this, though the prince came home from these wanderings looking tired and distraught. But about a month after the queen's death, some said they could see a change in him. There was a look in his eye as of a man who has seen visions, and he would be out all day, although his horse did not bear any signs of hard riding. His chief friend among the older courtiers was Lord Drinian, who had been his father's captain on that great voyage to the ends of the world. One evening, Drinian said to the prince, "Your Highness, you must soon give over seeking this snake. There is no true vengeance on a witless brute as there ought to be on a man. You are wearying yourself in vain." And the prince answered him, "My lord, I have almost forgotten the snake in these days." And Drinian asked him why, if that were so, he rode out so continually into the northern woods. "My lord," he said, I have seen there the most beautiful thing that was ever made. Well, fair prince, said Drinian, let me ride with you tomorrow, that I may see this fair thing. Certainly, said Rilian. Then, in good time on the next day, they saddled their horses and rode at a great gallop into the northern woods, and alighted at the same fountain where the queen had met her death. Drinian thought it was strange that the prince would choose that place, of all places, to linger in, and there they rested until it came to noon. And at noon, Drinian looked up and saw the most beautiful lady he had ever seen. And she stood at the north side of the fountain and said no word, but beckoned to the prince with her hand, as if she was bidding him come to her. And she was tall and great, shining, and wrapped in a thin garment as green as poison. And the prince stared at her like a man out of his wits. But suddenly the lady was gone. Drinian knew not where, and they returned to Cair Paravel. It stuck in Drinian's mind that this shining green woman was evil. Drinian doubted very much whether he ought not to tell this adventure to the king, but he had little wish to be a blabbermouth and a talebearer, so he held his tongue. But afterwards he wished he had spoken. For the next day, Prince Rilian rode back again, alone. And the next night, he didn't come back. And from that hour, no trace of him was ever found. Ever found in Narnia or any neighboring land, and neither his horse or his hat or his cloak or anything else of his was ever found. Then Drinian, in the bitterness of his heart, went to Caspian and said, Lord King, slay me speedily as a traitor, for by my silence I have destroyed your son. And he told him the story. Then Caspian caught up a battle axe and rushed upon Lord Drinian to kill him. And Drinian stood stock still, waiting for the death blow. But when the axe was raised, Caspian suddenly threw it away and cried out, I have lost my queen and my son, and shall I lose my best friend also? And he fell on Lord Drinian's neck and embraced him, and they both wept, and their friendship was not broken. Such was the story of Rilian. And when it was over, Jill said, I bet that serpent and that woman were the same person. True, true, we think the same as you, hooted the owls. But we don't think she killed the prince, said Glimfeather, because no bones. We know she didn't, said Scrub. Aslan told Pole that he is alive somewhere. That almost makes it worse, said the oldest owl. It means she had some use for him and some deep scheme against Narnia. Long, long ago, at the very beginning, a white witch came out of the north and bound our land in ice and snow for 100 years, and we think this must be some of the same crew. Very well, then, said Scrub. Pole and I have got to go and find this prince. Can you help us? Have you any clue, you two? Said Glimfeather. Yes, said Scrub. We know that we've got to go north. And we know that we've got to reach the ruins of a great giant city. After this, there was a great deal of too-hooing than ever, and the noises of birds shifting their feet and ruffling their feathers, and then all the owls started speaking at once. They all explained how very sorry they were that they couldn't go with the children on their search. You'd want to travel by day, of course, and we want to travel by night, they said. Oh, that wouldn't do. One or two owls added that even here in the ruined tower, it wasn't nearly so dark as it had been when they began, and that the Parliament had been going on quite long enough, and, in fact, the mere mention of a journey to a ruined city of the giants seemed to have dampened the spirits of all the birds. But Glimfeather said, if they want to go that way, up into Ettinsmoor, then we must take them to one of the Marshwiggles. They are the only people who can help them much. True, true, do, said the owls. Come on then, said Glimfeather. I'll take one. Who'll take the other? It must be done tonight. I will, as far as the Marshwiggles, said another owl. Are you ready? Said Glimfeather to Jill. I think Pole has fallen asleep, said Scrub. Well, that's the end of chapter 4. Now we have a lot of questions, don't we? And not many answers. But we have hope. We have hope that somehow or another, Jill and Eustace are going to find Prince Rilian, and we're going to find more about this evil green dressed lady who's sort of maybe the impersonation of a wicked green evil poisonous snake. Whoa, lots of evil in this story. Who does that green snake remind you of them in the Bible? Satan? Uh-huh. Does Satan ever do anything good? Anything really good? Never. Does he love anybody? No. He's incapable of love. Is he capable of doing anything that's right or fair or just? No, absolutely. Only evil. Only evil. And that seems to be who has captured Prince Rilian. So come back next time and let's find how Jill and Eustace get on in their journey to see if they can rescue Prince Rilian from the clutches of the evil green snake lady. Wow, I'm looking forward to that. Bye for now, everybody. Thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you again really soon, I hope. Bye.